Hey, what's going on, everybody? Locked on Badgers, Ryan Herrings here. We're gonna bring Justin Julka online, and we're gonna talk about some of the recruits, and we're gonna talk a little bit about this year's football recruiting expectations and what a disappointment would be. All of that and more on today's Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every day. We really appreciate it. Also, before you go, remember to visit one of our show sponsors, Bet Online. Today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. They have you covered this year with all your props, odds, and lines more than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. We're going to bring Justin into the show, longtime contributor, partner to this. One of the brainchilds of the BuckyCast, the brainchild of the BuckyCast podcast. And we haven't had you on in a while. We've had some recruiting news, Justin. I want to jump into what you've talked about on the show, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it. The first thing I wanted to start with is James Durand, the offensive line recruit, the second recruit commit in the 2023 class of Arizona. What are your thoughts on his game and how he fits?
If Bob Bostad wants him, then I want him.
I love it.
I love Bostad as a coach, and he seems to have a knack for finding those guys that have that physicality and mean streak to them. I think Durand is a guy who has some interesting physical attributes, seems to have some good athleticism to him. The way I look at this is when it comes to Bostad as a coach, I don't care about stars. Mm-hmm. I think he rarely misses on guys with what he stocks the cupboard with. And it showed back when he was, the line coach in 2010 and 11. Like the guys he had that were in there, and I think he'll still recruit at a high level, mind you. But if he takes a mid 3-star guy, I feel comfortable with him taking a mid 3-star guy because I think that guy's going to pan out.
You trust the evaluation. Really you know what I like about this too, and you and I chopped this up many times. We didn't like the constant line shuffling, the guys feeling like they're playing out of position. This is a 6'4" dude. He's a guard, and I feel
he's definitely interior.
I like bringing in guys where not that a 6'7" guy can't play guard, but we've been lacking some of the interior dudes. This is an interior dude.
I personally I like guys a little smaller simply because of the fact I think it's easier to keep leverage. Like the middle line guys typically on defense are a little bit smaller. They're not like the end guys where they have all that length and they're trying to bend the corner. So you have defensive linemen who might be 6'2", 6'3", a little bit smaller, who are trying to jump up under you. And when you have 6'7" guys, it's really hard for them to keep their pad level down and get under in the run game. And you can get stalemated in the middle of the line on your run plays. And Wisconsin likes to run between the tackles more than just about any team in the country. So if they get stalemated in the middle of the line, they're in trouble. Because especially if you're facing teams that are more athletic than you and you start moving laterally, it's not a good place to be for Wisconsin.
So I know it's a sample size of 2 in the 2023 recruiting class. But Durand's my favorite guy so far. I say that kind of again, tongue in cheek, there's 2 guys, but yeah. I think it's a really good pickup. I really like it. I think if it's a need, I think this class needs interior offensive linemen. And I agree with you on your point with Bob Bostad. The other thing I want to get into is Wisconsin, since you've been on, has also landed the transfer safety out of Utah, Kamo'i Latu. I'm thinking I'm pronouncing that right. I want to throw this question to you. I haven't really discussed this, and I really wanted your thoughts on it because I think you're good at kind of comparing different groups and different teams. Is this year's secondary better than last year's secondary? And keep in mind that you never would have said that right at the beginning of the offseason. But enter 4 graduate transfers from the portal. Or not graduate transfers, but 4 transfers from the portal, all with experience. Did we improve the secondary?
I like the guys we brought in at corner. I think we improved athletically at the corner position over what we had previously. And that's not a knock on the guy there. Caesar, they played some really good football. But I think that those guys lacked a little bit in overall size. Caesar Williams was a longer guy, but he didn't carry a lot of weight. He was a little slimmer build. For the life of me, I can't think of our other guy.
Van Hicks.
Yeah, yep. Hicks. Hicks was a little undersized. He wasn't super small. He was probably 5'10", but he was a small 5'10". And he put up good measurable numbers in terms of his athleticism. But I think he was more of a slot corner if we really looked at it. And I think the guys that we brought in offer a little bit more in terms of the, just a little bit more lateral quickness and cover ability there. I think we might see more plays made by this secondary. That being said, I think there is a chance for more breakdowns. We saw a few of those early last year, but there weren't a ton of them late. I mean, other than the Nebraska game, there really wasn't a game where the secondary was a problem. So the way I look at it is I think that we will see more big plays out of the secondary this year. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be better. It may drop off slightly statistically, but we may get more plays that are, shock plays, I would say, by the defense. We're, turning plays that turn the table on the other team.
So, because it's really interesting, right? You're losing Nelson, Wilder, Hicks, Dean Ingram's moving over, Caesar Williams. That's 5 guys that played a lot. But now you're shuffling. You're going to get more minutes from Hunter Wooler, right? And you're bringing in.
And we both love him.
We both love him. And you're bringing in Dort, Shaw, Clark, and now Latu. I think you're better. I think, and part of that is the internal growth of Wooler as well. But I think if you add Wooler to that mix, you could argue Jay Shaw coming in as a second-team All Pac-12 player, right? You could argue he is on last year's team or this year's team would have been the best player in the secondary.
I don't necessarily disagree. And they're talking Alex Smith as the number 1 corner.
Great point. That's a great point too. So you're gonna have more growth from him as well.
And physically, he probably had the best physical stature of our corners last year. He needed a little bit of growth and reps, and I think he got some of that last year. But I think he definitely, now he's had a few years in the program, he's definitely picked up a ton of reps through spring here, and he'll get a ton more in the fall. But he had good size, if I recall. He's like 5'11", and he had a decent frame to him. So I think he's a guy who can stand up physically with some bigger receivers, which is a big deal because we didn't really have a guy who had the frame that could hang with a guy who was 6'1", 6'2", and had any sort of real beef to him at all at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that's a great point with Alexander Smith. I think it's better. I think the secondary is better. Which, by the way, I feel like I'm going to come back and those words are going to come back and bite me, right? Because wasn't this the number 1 passing efficiency defense in the country last year? Or the number?
Yeah, it was up there. Defense. It was the number 1 overall defense. But
I will say this. I will say this, and we're going to kind of move on to our next point. But to your point, Caesar Williams was a really solid player, but he was also like a 4.55 corner. They like that.
He wasn't even that fast.
I'm giving him credit.
Yeah.
But it's hard to scheme around that at times, I think. And I think we're, like, to your point, I think we're athletically a little better, and I'm excited for the young guys.
It closes windows.
Right.
There's less room to throw the ball into if you have guys that are more athletic and faster. And I think that these guys, we've athletically improved at those positions. At safety, I think the big deal there is that I think Nelson was a really good athlete, and I think that showed with his pro day. But he was a guy that you could get to bite and make mistakes. And
Penn State game.
And I think that is something that we may see some improvement on the back end.
Yeah, I hope so, because you pair a better secondary, if that's even possible, with those outside linebackers we got coming up in this year. Boy, watch out. Coming up next, guys, we're going to continue talking with Justin. Him and I disagree a little bit on what expectations should be at Wisconsin. We're going to get into that next. But first, today's show is brought to you, as always, by Bet Online. BetOnline remains your number 1 source for all your sports betting, gambling, wagering information needs. It is also a great spot just to get your sports news, podcast newsletters, where coaches are going, where players are ending up. It is a fantastic site that we've all grown to love at Locked On. And this is a great time of the year to do it. NBA playoffs are full swing. If you think the Bucks are gonna go all the way, you think they're a favorite, you think they're gonna once again ride Giannis to that glory. It's a great time to put some money on them. Have some fun with it. Baseball's heating up. NFL futures are here. We've talked a ton about if you have a good feel on a team in the NFC, AFC, NFC North, AFC East, whatever it is. This is a great time. If you think it's the Bills, if you think their time, they put together a great roster. They have maybe the best quarterback in football right now. Maybe it's time to put a few bucks up on that Buffalo Mafia and roll with it. So BetOnline, number 1 source for all your sports betting needs. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you guys for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every single day. Make sure you also check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter, The Draft is Coming Up, guys, is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and a bunch of other great guests to give you a look into the NBA draft, mock draft, and player rankings. Great time for Badger fans. Obviously, Johnny Davis is going to be featured prominently, in that show and in those segments. So make sure you check out NBA Locked On Big Board. And now we're going to jump back to Justin, bring him back in. Again, Justin Julka joining us on the show. Justin, I answered this question. We had a Twitter question earlier, and I loved it so much I wanted to ping you on it. The question was essentially, has 9-4 become a disappointment for Wisconsin? And is that fair or is that realistic? Really quickly, I want to give you what I said, and then I want to see where you go with this.
Okay.
I think Wisconsin fans are spoiled, football and basketball, right? And I think 9-4 is a successful season. And I think we've gotten to the point where Badger fans don't believe that. And I think it's because we have had such consistent success that we take it for granted. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm one of the people that my view on things is if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward. So to me, the way I look at it is Wisconsin as a team has accomplished a great deal. There's a lot of programs that would kill to have the success that they're having and have had. Now, that being said, I think when you look at a 9-4 season for Wisconsin, you have to also take a look into what comprises that 9-4 season. If you're losing to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State and going 9-3 in your regular season, that's different than losing to Minnesota, Purdue, and Michigan State. Not that Michigan State is a terrible loss, but they're not the program that the other three programs are.
Right.
So when you look at it, you have to kind of take a look at it and say, are these teams is Wisconsin losing to teams that are their peers or better than them? Or are they losing to teams that are inferior to them and they're just not getting the job done with the talent level that they have? The bulk of the Wisconsin schedule, we look at it coming into this next year. If you look at it legitimately, you can make the argument that there's one game they play that has a more talented roster than them, and that's Ohio State. And that was not close. I mean, that's fair. Wisconsin loses that game, no harm, no foul there.
In Columbus as well.
Exactly. So I look at that and it's like, okay, whatever. That game is what it is. I expect them to lose that. Now, if they lose to Iowa and to Minnesota this next year, yes, that is a failure to me. Because those are two teams that you've played really well against and you've actually had very strong, almost dominant streaks against. And now you're suddenly starting to drop the ball a little bit there, especially Minnesota. Like for the longest time, we were crushing them. And yes, Minnesota has gotten better, but I look at it and I'm like, the last couple of years, I look at it more as a failure on Wisconsin's part in how those games have played out than what has been Wisconsin was the worst team.
So I feel like you're validating my opinion that Wisconsin fans are kind of spoiled, right? Because and I hear you. I really hear you in that Wisconsin.
Yeah, we are. I mean,
is getting a little stagnant in a way.
Yeah.
But stagnating at 9 to 10 wins, like you said, if you lose to Ohio State, you use Minnesota and Iowa, right? None of Ohio State we talked about. We get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm firmly convinced we'll never beat Ohio Sate again in my lifetime. I just believe that at this point. But Minnesota and Iowa aren't bad teams.
Oh, they're not bad teams. I'm not making that point at all. But I'm saying is you have proven in the past that these are teams that you can consistently beat. And if you're dropping the ball against them, that is a failure. So my point, I guess, is on this. Everyone wants Wisconsin to take a step forward. There's not a fan out there that's saying, I don't want to, start being in the national championship discussion on a yearly basis. That's where we want to be. Now, if suddenly we're competing directly with Iowa and Minnesota, two teams that haven't accomplished what Wisconsin has over the last 20 years, then you have to start taking a look at it and say, are we kind of dropping back to the pack? And at that point, you have to kind of, take a look at yourself as a program and say, are we maximizing what we're capable of? Are we maximizing the talent that we picked up in recruiting and getting the most out of what we can? And I think you can make the argument there that they've out-recruited every team other than Nebraska, who, as we can agree, doesn't tend to maximize theirs by any means.
By any stretch. But it'll be different this year. Right? That's what people say. It'll be different this year.
Hey, 10th time is the charm.
Right? Speaking of Nebraska, really quickly, when I answered this question previously, would 9-4 be a disappointment? I titled the show, and I really didn't do it to pick on Nebraska. I said Nebraska fans would kill to be us, right? Because a lot of fan bases would be. And my YouTube comments, I got like 9 just random. I don't even know how they found me, bro. Like it's not like I have a giant.
You said
following.
Nebraska. It's like,
and they're like, well, you didn't win any national titles.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't want to live in Wisconsin. All
Cool.
these rando Nebraska fans.
Wait. You're living in Nebraska and you're going to complain about Wisconsin?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
This one dude didn't even bring it to football.
You don't have the right. You do not have the right to complain.
He didn't even bring it to football. He brought it
Wisconsin.
To your state isn't fun to live in, essentially, or something along those lines. But I like
Wisconsin's
5 or 6 Nebraska
much prettier state than Nebraska.
That's far prettier. Nebraska's a terrible state to live in.
It is.
I'm kidding.
It's a flyover state for a reason.
Listen, for those 7 rando Nebraska fans that are following up to see if I'm following up to their comments, I apologize for that. Nebraska, I'm sure, is very lovely. But to your point earlier, again, like every team, you just, I think where you're at, and I think where I disagree mostly with your discussion point here is, I think it's unfair to expect a team to beat every solid team on the schedule. Like you're going to drop, even the best teams drop the occasional game to the decent team.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying that your expectations need to be at that level. That doesn't mean that that's what's always going to happen, but your expectations need to be, we're better than these teams, we should beat them. And if you start to consistently lose to them, then you're heading in the wrong direction.
But not beat them 100% of the time, right? Like beat them 70% of the time, or
I think that would be a good mark. Well, if it's Minnesota, let's say 80. Let's
nudge it up
80%.
Yeah. Although, listen, recently
Iowa, honestly, if we beat Iowa 60 to 70% of the time, I would say that's probably pretty fair. I think
that's
that
fair.
We are more talented than them throughout. It's basically come down to quarterback play for the most part there. Whoever has the better quarterback play in a given season ends up typically winning that game.
Which is
unless
funny
we have a difference maker at running back.
I was going to say, which is funny between these two programs, because usually the quarterback play is generally mediocre across the board, right? So it's almost like...
Oh, yeah, it's whoever's the least mediocre of the two.
So terrible, man. Let me jump to this one, because I kind of want to shift it just really quickly. I was talking about another kind of point here with Nebraska, and is there a point where... Because these divisions were set up to have Wisconsin and Nebraska as kind of the premium programs in the West, whatever you'd call it, right?
Matchup.
Is there a point where this is just getting silly and the Big Ten needs to scrap the divisions? Because Nebraska stinks. They've been bad for a while. And quite frankly, Wisconsin has been, you and I would at least both agree, incredibly consistent, but they can't match up with what. I don't like the being in the West anymore is what I'm saying. I used to like it because I felt it gave Wisconsin an easier path, but I just think I
think any mistakes now completely obliterate any chance of them having anything. So they lose to anybody in the West, it's over. It just is.
Where if you're in the East, that's not the case.
Yes. I think what I would like to see would be, if we're going to do this, 2 rivalries that are saved, and then the rest of it is just play, 10 scheduled?
10? Yeah, we play 10. So, 10.
Okay.
So
you'd have a 10 game, or you'd have 8 teams that are just randomized. And I think it should be random. Like, I know you want to have the balance or whatever there. Listen, to a point that's good, but if you want everyone to showcase against each other, you're going to have to just kind of round this out. If you're doing 8 games, you should still have a fairly competitive schedule.
Agreed.
If you're splitting it, across the entire conference.
Yeah, I agree. And the other part of this too is, I don't know where you're at on this. It gets a little tiring to play Northwestern every single year, to play Purdue I love playing Iowa. I love playing, me personally, I love playing Nebraska.
How much more would you prefer to play either Penn State or Michigan or Michigan State? More.
Not Ohio State. I mean,
Indiana, who we rarely get to play anymore. Those games are typically fun games. We've had some really good, shootouts back in the day. We would have, some defensive battle like we had a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would love it. I think it makes a ton of sense. All right, guys, coming up, we're going to keep Justin on the show as long as humanly possible. We're going to talk a little bit about recruiting expectations this year and what we would both consider a disappointment. But first, let's jump to our sponsors of our show. All right, guys, Justin back on this one. Justin, you kind of wanted to bring something to the table here. I'm going to let you introduce this one and take the lead here.
Well, you and I were kind of discussing this prior to coming on the show here, and it was you asked me the question of does Wisconsin, or what would be a valid, or actually I asked you the question.
You did.
What would be a failure for Wisconsin in terms of recruiting for this year? And I mean that in terms of rankings. And when I say that in terms of rankings, I do mean flat out where in the nation, given the class size, which I think we're looking at probably 20 to 21, maybe 22 recruits in this cycle, where do we expect the team to finish in the recruiting rankings? And there'll be people out there that say, well, on a per recruit basis, we're here. Well, they go hand in hand, right? You should, if you have a good recruiting average and you have a 22 person class, you're going to be at a high ranking. It's just how it should play out. Wisconsin, to me, is trending poorly this cycle. And some of that might be that players just haven't been updated in their rankings. You know, things change dramatically between now and I would say October, early November, just because kids get into their senior years and they can have a lot of growth. I mean, it's a high school kid, so he can physically just mature significantly heading into that senior season. So kids can jump quite a bit. I mean, we've seen that before with guys like Graham Mertz, who went from like a fringe 4-star to being a mid to high 4-star. So guys will bounce around a little bit, and some of the lower ranked guys will get seen more.
But the Badgers got to get those guys to commit anyway. Like they don't even have those guys to potentially jump.
So from what we've seen so far, there's very few high-level targets that Wisconsin is in on. And by high-level targets, I mean guys that are being sniffed out and offered by Blue Bloods. They have Tackett Curtis, and that's about it. Like they have a lot of guys who are fringe 4-stars, which there's nothing wrong with that, especially for defensive linemen and stuff like that.
Tyler Gant.
That's where I think that the Badgers need to be. If they're in the 88 to 90 range for the by the 2.247 composite, that to me is the next step for Wisconsin defensive line. That would put them at basically starting guys that are effectively a 4-star defensive line, and it would make a world of difference. But they're the high-level players that they need to drive the class and carry the class are not there. And that the positions that typically run that for Wisconsin are running back, typically outside linebacker, sometimes middle linebacker, and offensive lineman.
Certainly offensive line, yeah.
So this class, now some of that's going to change. I give Bostad the benefit of the doubt. You know, if we end up having 3 players that are upper 80s, I trust him to get guys that are going to end up showing up on the field. That being said, that still doesn't look great in terms of recruiting rankings, not having anyone that's above.
So from a rankings perspective, because I've been on here before, and I've made the point, this is not going to be a strong recruiting class if you just look at the rankings. For many reasons, right? If Wisconsin finishes outside the top 30 for you, is that a disappointment? Is that a failure? If they finish outside the top 40,
given where we previously, prior to the shakeups with the recruiting staff and everything, and where we were finishing in the recruiting rankings, yes. Yeah. We were typically right around 30 or under. I believe we were 29 one year, 26 one year, and I think like 18 or 19.
We cracked the top 20 with that really loaded class.
And we've taken a dramatic step back. Now, last year's class was small, but we did not finish strong on that class, and we did not keep the walls up in Wisconsin. So if we had brought home the in-state class, it dramatically would have shifted where our ranking was this last year. Probably would have put us into the mid-30s, I believe, which for a small class, that would have been great. But that's not where we finished.
So you're kind of at the point where you've almost already foretold's the wrong word, but you think that it's already there. This class is not going to be a strong class at the end, just from a rankings perspective.
Based off of who we currently have offered and that we have bringing on, unless there's a dramatic shift in the rankings for these guys, I think it's very likely we're looking at a class that's probably in the low 40s.
So let me flip it to you on this, because I agree with you. I think for a lot of reasons. I think Paul Chryst taking, frankly, forever to rebuild his recruiting staff. I like what he's done with it now that it's rebuilt, but it took too long to get there. I think the lack of those 4-star kids in state hurts. And frankly, I think shifting a bunch of coaches, like they brought in a lot of new coaches. Listen, some of these, like Bobby Inker's been in the NFL. It's going to take him a while, right? They're shifting guys around. It's going to take some of these guys a while. So for all of these reasons, I think the class is going to be very good. But let me ask you this before you jump into that on that point. Let me ask you this. What needs to happen in this class? It's not going to be highly ranked, but what do the Badgers need to get out of this class? If you can think of a certain position, a certain type of player.
Well, they need to find a quarterback that strengthens that QB room.
100% agree.
They have to have a hit. Now, we don't know a lot about Deacon Hill. We don't know a lot about Miles Burkett yet, but they need somebody. They need depth in that room where there's legitimate competition for who should be starting. Unless Graham Mertz takes a big step forward this year, it will be a very big letdown if he is starting still next year. Because we cannot have a quarterback that is a guy that we're looking at, mid-teens for touchdowns and double-digit interceptions and have that be considered a adequate QB. We need to have somebody who can get us close to 20 touchdown passes, if not 20 touchdown passes, and hopefully in that 7-8 pick range at most. And I think that's doable at Wisconsin. You're going to have a great running game. They need to upgrade the talent in the wide receiver room, which I think they're headed in that direction. I think we like Whitted's recruiting so far.
Yeah, so far I agree.
It's now we need to see what he's actually got there. But I think he's found some pieces. I also think that we need to really find out what we have at the tight end position. So at this point, there's a lot of offense. Like the offensive side of the ball is a total guessing game of what we actually have.
Yep, I agree.
The hit rate on the defensive side has been honestly amazing. Yep. Like how many misses can we account for on the defensive side that aren't injury based?
I mean, it's difficult. I mean, we could do a show and look through some recruiting misses, but the hit rate defensively is far higher than offensively. There's no doubt about it.
There have been very few guys that have not even been involved in reps in the fall. Like it seems we're cycling through everybody when it comes down to it. We're hearing guys that were last year and like, yeah, he's been there. He's been showing well. He's just younger and there's guys in front of him. So when you hear that, that's a confidence builder looking at the defense that you're like, we're stocked. Like these guys are just going to keep kind of cycling through and they're going to get older and grow into their role and they'll be ready to go by the time they go.
Listen, the defense is absolutely loaded. And that's from a recruiting and development and a talent identification standpoint. And that side of the ball is clicking on all cylinders. But it's funny that you went quarterback. And we'll wrap up on here with your first thought of what needs to get fixed. Because I had a similar question that I was talking about on a different show. And I said the exact same thing. I said they have to get a quarterback in this class that can potentially raise the ceiling. Right. And to me, that means you're taking somebody with some tools, somebody with at least some skill set that we don't currently have. And who knows if he hits, right? You never know with quarterbacks, but you have to bring something in.
Let's look at this. What do you consider a hit for a Wisconsin quarterback? What do you think is, and I don't want to hear the toad line of what all the Wisconsin fans say, well, as long as he does this, that's all we need from him, because that's because people that say that are because their standards are so low for the quarterback position at Wisconsin that they don't understand what it is nationally to be considered a decent or above average quarterback. Cohen had the hints of some of that.
Cohen was a good player. I would say a hit would be a guy that could be some type of version of Scott Tolzien. Like, I need a quarterback who on 3rd and 7 against a good defense can throw a 10-yard out and put it on the numbers. Like, seriously.
No. I understand what you're saying. My view on it is Wisconsin has gotten to the point now where we should be, and I'm just going to talk bulk stats here. And obviously that's not the be all end all, but I think Wisconsin, given the offense that they run, should be able to find a quarterback that can get into the low to mid 20s in touchdown passes and not turn the ball over significantly. And that's because you're going to be facing almost all single coverage, and you're also going to have a very good running game to take pressure off. The bulk of the time, if you're running play action, you should be throwing to somebody who's open.
I mean, I feel like that's almost Scott Tolzien, though. I think his senior year, he was just under 20 touchdowns. I would have to actually
16.
look. Yeah.
16
So,
and 9.
and that was also a year where there were some huge blowouts. Like he would have had more touchdowns if we didn't like pull back dramatically.
I think that's safe to say. He was efficient. The difference there is I would like somebody that occasionally can win us a game. And not that Tolzien wasn't that, but he was never tasked with that in his time here, where we needed him to go out there and get us 250 yards and 3 scores.
Some of this is like a battered relationship type stuff. Like, you know, we've had such a long stretch at times of mediocre quarterback play. Outside of some spurts here and there for sure. Yeah. And the book isn't written on Mertz yet. Right. I'm not closing that book, but a Scott Tolzien to me feels like a golden unicorn right now. You know, like
well, look, I brought up the fact that we talked about Michigan State the other day, you and I, not on here, but just in general. And they've had, 4 quarterbacks drafted in the last 20 years or so? Something like that?
Seems about right, yeah. Cook, Cousins.
Wisconsin's had one quarterback. And you could say we've been a far more successful program during that time. So at some point, our hit rate at quarterback, you need to take a legitimate look at it and say, we are not maximizing this position at all for what the type of program that we are.
I think that's very fair. All right, guys. As always, I could chop it up with Justin for a lot longer than the time that we usually try to knock these shows out in. But Justin's over there. You can see Locked On JJ. As always, if you guys, we're going to continue having him on the show, guys. So you're going to get your share of Justin. Really appreciate him coming on. And as always, thank you guys for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every day. Really appreciate the subscribers. The comments from the angry Nebraska fans was fantastic as well.
We'll keep working on those.
Yeah, we'll keep working on that as well. Thank you guys so much for listening. Like the show, listen, subscribe, all the good stuff, and we'll be back at you tomorrow. All right, later, guys.